Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unrolling what is honestly a truly fascinating map. We're going to explore the incredibly complex, bustling world of the hematopoietic and lymphoreticular systems, drawing all of our insights directly from the authoritative framework laid out in Chapter 12 of Harsh Mohan's textbook of Pathology. We are going to be navigating everything here, from how your perfectly healthy white blood cells function day to day, all the way to the exact specific pathways that lead to complex neoplasms and organ damage. So if you've ever wanted to truly understand how pathologists classify and decode blood and lymph disorders, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get started. All right, let's just dive straight into the syllabus for today. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with normal and reactive immune cells, look at the origins of malignancy, explore myeloid neoplasms, then lymphoid malignancies, and finally wrap up with the spleen, thymus, and histiocytes.
Section 1. Normal and reactive immune cells. The baseline.
Okay, so before we can really understand the pathology, things going wrong, we have to establish our baseline and observe how these cells actually behave when they're healthy. The lymphoreticular system is essentially the body's primary defense network. It encompasses the lymph nodes, your circulating white blood cells, the spleen, and the thymus. Think of it like a highly coordinated security grid that is constantly active, filtering fluids, producing immune cells, and literally standing guard against infection.
So, how are these cellular defenders actually born? Well, they originate through some incredibly structured pathways. Step 1 is granulopoiesis, which is the process that generates granular white blood cells right in the bone marrow. Step 2 is lymphopoiesis, and this creates the lymphocytes that drive our adaptive immunity. In a healthy person, these two processes are running constantly to ensure you have the steady, perfectly balanced supply of mature leukocytes, all ready to protect the body.
Now, what is absolutely fascinating here is just how aggressive a completely healthy defense system can be. When a threat pops up, the system mounts these intense reactive responses that can honestly mimic much more serious diseases. For example, reactive lymphadenitis is simply your nodes swelling up as they fight off a bug. Infectious mononucleosis involves a massive but still reactive proliferation of cells. And leukemoid reactions? They produce so many white blood cells they can literally be mistaken for full-blown leukemia. But crucially, they remain entirely reactive and completely non-malignant. It's basically a massive false alarm.
But that brings us to a critical and, honestly, much darker threshold. We've seen exactly how the system behaves when it's just reacting to an outside threat. But what happens when those fundamental rules of controlled growth are broken? What actually happens when healthy cells become malignant?
Which brings us to Section 2, the origins of malignancy, breaking the rules.
Here is where we pivot from natural defense over to pure pathology. And the textbook framework outlines something really important. The transformation from a healthy cell into a lymphohematopoietic malignancy doesn't just happen by magic. It is strictly driven by specific etiology, which are the underlying causes, and pathogenesis, which is the step-by-step biological mechanism of the disease. These underlying drivers are what actually force a normal, completely predictable immune cell to mutate, multiply out of control, and ultimately become a dangerous neoplasm.
So if you take one thing away from how pathologists organize all this, it's this major dichotomy: the myeloid lineage versus the lymphoid lineage. It's basically a giant fork in the road. When doctors look at blood and lymph cancers, they first have to figure out where the rogue cell actually originated. Did it start in the myeloid lineage? The cells that normally become granular white blood cells and red blood cells? Or did it start in the lymphoid lineage, the cells that eventually become your B and T lymphocytes? That single fundamental distinction dictates the entire classification system we use.
Let's look closer at the first path in Section 3, myeloid neoplasms and leukemias.
Pathologists basically categorize these myeloid breakdowns by their specific mechanical failures. It's like a factory going completely haywire in a few different ways. In myeloproliferative diseases, the marrow is just mass-producing mature cells, way too many of them. Acute myeloid leukemia, on the other hand, is this sudden, super-aggressive overproduction of immature, non-functional cells that literally crowd out the healthy ones. And finally, you have myelodysplastic syndromes, which represent a failure to mature. The bone marrow is still producing blood cells, sure, but they remain fundamentally defective. Each one is a totally distinct breakdown of that myeloid factory.
Now for the other path, Section 4, lymphoid malignancies and lymphomas.
Transitioning over to the lymphoid side of the family, we hit another massive fork in the road.
On one side, you've got Hodgkin's disease, which is characterized by the presence of these very specific, highly unique mutant cells. And on the flip side, we have the non-Hodgkin's lymphomas and leukemias, which forms a much larger and frankly incredibly diverse group of diseases. Figuring out which side of this dividing line a patient's disease falls on is absolute step one for a pathologist's diagnosis.
Because that non-Hodgkin's category is just so incredibly massive, pathologists essentially have to play detective. They track down the precise origin of the rogue cell. They're looking for its maturity, like did it arise from a young precursor cell or a mature peripheral one? And what's its exact lineage? Is it a B cell or a T cell malignancy? Pinpointing these exact cellular coordinates isn't just an academic exercise, it's exactly how modern medicine figures out how to target treatments.
But it doesn't stop at just identifying the cell type. Pathologists also have to accurately conduct the staging of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which means figuring out exactly how far the disease has spread through the body. They also need to quickly differentiate a primary lymphoma from lymph node metastatic tumors, basically cancers that started somewhere else entirely and just traveled to the node. Finally, they have to track plasma cell disorders, which is a very specific subset of diseases involving the cells that usually produce our antibodies. It's a lot of ground to cover.
And finally, Section 5, spleen, thymus, and histiocytes.
So looking beyond just the blood and lymph nodes for this final leg of our anatomical journey, let's first highlight histiocytic neoplasms. Histiocytes are essentially tissue-dwelling immune cells. You can think of them as the localized security guards for your body's tissues. When these specific cells become malignant, they form their very own unique category of disease. The main example noted in the textbook framework is Langerhans cell histiocytosis, which is a rare disorder where these specific cells rapidly multiply and cause actual tissue damage.
Finally, we literally have to look at the physical collateral damage to the major organs of the system. When the diseases we've been discussing really take hold, the spleen often suffers from massive enlargement, which fundamentally ruins its ability to filter blood and manage immunity. Similarly, the thymus, which is essentially the training ground for your T cells, undergoes severe structural changes, and that leads directly to functional changes that compromise the body's overall immune competence. The disease isn't just floating in the cells, it actually reshapes the architecture of the organs themselves.
And honestly, that just brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the pathologist's task. We've journeyed all the way from the normal, everyday generation of white blood cells to the precise branching classifications of devastating leukemias and lymphomas, right down to the physical, structural impact on organs like the spleen and thymus. So I want to leave you with this to consider. How does mapping this massive, complex family tree of diseases fundamentally change the way we actually diagnose and fight them? Well, by giving every single rogue cell a specific name and a specific branch on this roadmap, we transform what looks like a chaotic disease into a solvable puzzle. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the science around you.